Glee.
Order. Good morning and welcome to this morning's session of the Women and Equalities Select Committee and our inquiry into the impact of the cost of living rises on women. Can I thank the ministers for attending this morning? As usual, committee members will ask you questions in turn. I am going to ask a big favour though. Please can you make your answers as brief as possible? I'm conscious that it is budget day today and that everybody will be enthusiastic to get their seat in the chamber in good time for that. I'm going to start this morning, specifically Minister Churchill. Can I ask you what the government's doing to make sure that impacts are not felt disproportionately by women with intersectional qualities?
So the first thing really to say, good morning and thank you for inviting me. The first thing to say really is no doubt that the last few years have been difficult for anyone and everyone with a combination of those global factors. And poverty rates for men and women, even when there's intersectionality applied, are the same. So essentially what we have done is made sure that we have reached out with immediate support, like the cost of living payments, so that they can be got swiftly. It was the largest package in Europe at 104 billion. But we've also made sure that we have had a consistent drumbeat of uprating benefits through the last period, in line with inflation at 10.1 last year, but also this year at 6.7, which is above inflation. In order to give that broader protection, we also have the Job Centre offer that works very directly with individuals to understand them, and we have 50 plus champions in those job centres. We have individuals who have specialisations in midlife, we have them in the young employment coaches, and making sure that no matter what the challenge from the intersectionality, they are supported, and I would suppose that's the broader point.
Poverty rates are the same for men and women. What data are you collecting to establish that?
So essentially, we work off the Household Below Average Income Fund, but also the data that we collect within DWP. We know that there is a disproportionate number of women in caring and in the lower income jobs. That means that more of our payments go to women. That is a statement of fact. 2.5 million of our lone parent families are headed by a female. 73% of those who receive carers allowance are women. 63% of pensioners are women because we have a longer life expectancy. But making sure that policies right across government into health and so on are looking at addressing some of those things, like health disparities and so on, actually mean that you can both build but also support, because the whole time we are looking at that, providing a safety net, but also making sure that work is the best way out of poverty. If I could ask James, if you don't mind, if there's anything he would add.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, so the latest published poverty statistics in the Household Below Average Income Survey show an equal rate of 17% for both men and women. So the outcome is similar, but obviously that reflects policies that are different for different groups. So on the question of intersectionality, for example, I would say if you look at the cost of living payments that we made, they went to people on means-tested benefits, people with disabilities and people over pension age. And women are represented more than men in all three of those groups. But for example, I think around 58% of the pensioner cost of living payments, for example, will have gone to women because of their representation in that part of the population. So all of those policies that we put in place are equality impact assessed when we give advice to ministers, and they pick up those issues of intersectionality in the population.
You collect data on ethnicity as well?
We do. When we actually evaluate our policies post-implementation, we often publish evaluation that include information on ethnicity. We won't necessarily have that up front, but it's something we look at when we evaluate our policies.
So when you're considering the public sector equality duty of your policies before you implement them, so I can see that you can collect the data in retrospect, before you implement them, do you consider the intersectional issues?
So we would always provide ministers with full advice on the impact on protected groups with subject to the data that's available to do that. And it's then scrutinised by the Social Security Advisory Committee before legislation is brought in.
And I would argue you see some of that coming out. So, for example, in the cost of living payments, where that additional cost of living payment was made to those with a disability of an additional £150 over and above for those who were eligible, the 3 payments up to £900 that were paid.
What work was done to establish whether that additional £150 was adequate to cover the additional costs of being disabled?
It was an additional uplift, but it wasn't the sole thing across government, because obviously there was the energy price gap. There was the energy the energy cap as well. On impact assessment for that, I'm sorry, it is not, disability is not held by me, it's held by the Minister for Ms Sussex, and I'm not going to give you a line that I don't feel completely solid in. I'll ask James, but if not, I will write to you.
Thank you. I think it would be interesting to know. We have had a lot of correspondence and evidence from disabled charities about the additional cost of being disabled, particularly when it comes to energy costs, maybe the need to keep a house heated warmer, the additional cost of charging electric wheelchairs, for example, hoists, etc. It'd be interesting to know how that £150 was reached and whether there was an analysis done of what the additional cost of being disabled actually was. Perhaps Mr. Wolfe can answer.
I mean, I think the main thing to say is that there's always going to be a bit of a trade-off between the speed with which we can get support into place and how detailed that support can be. So clearly £150 for people on qualifying benefits isn't going to take account of everybody's individual circumstances, because we're using benefit receipt as a proxy for that specific need. And as the Minister said, that's why there's a range of supports. So many of those families will also have received the means-tested cost of living payment as well. So I'm
just trying to establish, was this sort of a finger in the wind, or was there some evidence base to that £150 was reached?
So I think the answer to that is that if you look at the total package, there's investment in different.
No, that wasn't the question.
Okay, well, in that case, I think.
I think it would be really useful for us when looking at this to understand how the £150 was reached at, not the total package, but what the DWP's understanding of the additional cost of being disabled is. And if you want to write to us with that, that would be very helpful, please. Minister Caulfield, as Minister for Women, you get to champion women's voices across government and to ensure that there is no disproportionate impact of the cost of living crisis on women compared to men. I think it would be interesting to hear how you've engaged with women's groups around the cost of living crisis and what evidence they've provided to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, talking to various groups, charities, organisations, and there is differences across the country. So it's important to get as wide a range of voices as possible. There's kind of two predominant groups of women who've been more impacted than others. Firstly, those in the lower socioeconomic groups who struggle at the best of times. So when there is an impact on cost of living, they feel it even more. But it's particularly women for this kind of last 2 years that have struggled, that may have not struggled as much in the past. And that's mainly women who are unable to get additional income. So older women, older pensioners, and I think Joe touched on the fact that women do make up a greater proportion of pensioners, very often on their own in single income households. Obviously they're pensioners, they can't go out and do more work to increase their income. Very often asset rich but income poor, so they often don't qualify for things like pension credits, but they feel the heating costs, the food costs, inflationary costs. You've got women with a disability who obviously, again, who can't go out and earn more money because with a disability that's not always possible. But then you've got a group of women who then are carers, and whether that's childcare costs, which have also increased from what the government's rolling out the 30-hour free childcare to try and address some of those pressures. But you've got women who are caring for elderly parents. You've got kinship carers in particular who then don't get payments in the same way that foster carers do. Those groups of women who are not able to do extra hours at work or the increased costs have additional costs to them because they're caring for other people, have been particularly hit in a way that perhaps in ordinary times when costs of living pressures exist for those in lower socioeconomic groups have felt the pressure this time around. And I think that's why the government did some targeted schemes, but also some more universal schemes as well, because everyone was impacted, and those women in particular were the ones that were struggling the most.
And I think we've had particular representations from domestic abuse charities, those working in the sector supporting women who might have found themselves in a more vulnerable position because of the cost of living crisis. Can you outline what you and ministerial colleagues are doing to help women's centres in particular? And I'm thinking of refuges who have seen a significant increase in costs over the past couple of years.
So we have been doing a lot of work around domestic abuse. We had the Flexible Fund trial, which was in collaboration and partnership with the Women's Federation of England, making direct cash payments to victims and survivors. We've extended that actually. A further $2 million is going into the Flexible Fund until March 2025. So there was specific targeted funding to the women rather than necessarily the refuges or charities in relation to because I think not just cost of living but COVID in particular made it very difficult for women fleeing domestic abuse, and there was a recognition of that. But the crisis in Ukraine and the preceding or the following inflationary pressures, cost of energy pressures was pretty hot on the heels of COVID, and so women fleeing domestic abuse when they had the chance to leave then financially really struggled, and that's why the Flexible Fund was set up and has been extended up to 2025.
Has the government taken a decision then that it's more effective to support individual women than to support the sector?
I think it's a combination, really. Charities absolutely do a vital role, and there has been financial support for charities in the past. But I think there is also an argument to enable women directly to be able to make some decisions for themselves. And I think women are often best placed to make those decisions. And that's one of the real, financial abuse is one of the elements of domestic abuse, and having that ability to have some funding, have some money, to try and make some decisions. Often women say, when I've met with women who've been affected, if they'd had that funding, they'd have been able to make different decisions at different times. So there was a definite decision to allocate money to women directly.
Chair, if I may,
yes.
Could I just say what we do at DWP, because we're trialling the Ask Annie, which also is rolled out through most of our pharmacy network as well, so women can flag that marker that they are at the hands of someone who is abusing them. But also we do training within DWP up to 13 weeks. There is a specialist advisor. We can, in every DWP, you can be taken into a private room where you can have a discussion over your needs. We can work with them to set up a separate claim and to help, as Minister Caulfield said, walk them away from the perpetrator. And in the area of coercive control, of course, very often it's economic. So making sure that we have those skilled individuals in job centres is really important, because very often we are one of the few people they may be seeing on a regular basis because of attendance at a job centre in order to get work or to satisfy the eligibility for benefits.
Can I just ask Jo a question whilst I'm thinking about it? Minister Caulfield made a point about pension credit and pension credit guarantee. We know that there is an issue with not every pensioner who is entitled to it claiming it. Mm-hmm. Has the DWP done any targeted work to focus on older women who may be entitled to pension credit but are not applying for it?
There has been an incredible amount of engagement with older women, because actually it was languishing, wasn't it, somewhere around 50%, I think, if my memory serves me right, and we have really made an effort. The ability to apply stops at the end of March, I think I'm right in saying, she says, So
not for pension credit?
Yeah. Well, not for pension credit per se, but for the work that some of the work we're doing around pensioners. But we are targeting all the time to make sure that those who are eligible come forward and claim what they are entitled to, because it is vital, as Minister Caulfield said. Some of these sections of women end up being disproportionately impacted. So it is absolutely imperative that we are doing all we can to reach out and make sure those women, but actually everybody, can claim the things that they're entitled to in and around pension credit.
Thank you. Maria, did you want to come back in with something? Well,
it was just on the domestic abuse support. I mean, one of the other things that we've done by recognising economic abuse as a form of abuse is we've now got the toolkit that's available, and there's been a lot of work done with creditors so that they are taking into account a woman who may be fleeing domestic abuse in relation to managing their credit and being a bit more flexible for someone who may be in debt with bills or credit cards or whatever, if they know that economic abuse has happened, to take that into account in the way they manage the case for that particular woman.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I can put some questions to Minister Churchill. So as yet there's no indication that the UK Government's cost of living payments are going to continue beyond this financial year. Can you tell us if the Government is planning to continue these payments?
So the cost of living payments were always time limited to end on the 31st of March this year. Obviously we have, and we also have had the Household Support Fund running to the end of the year. We have a fiscal event this afternoon, and obviously it's well above my pay grade to speculate on what may or may not come through in that event.
And they'll be watching that closely. But I mean, I wonder, sort of looking at the payments, what the main conclusions are that you would draw from the delivery and the impact of the cost of living payments and the Household Support Fund. I'm wondering if these are things that you evaluate in terms of the gendered impact, for instance, and if you do evaluations, whether that's something that's going to be published.
So the impact assessments were done on the cost of living payments for both the 22-23 because it's important we understand where they go. And from the impact assessments, we estimate that around 54% of the disability cost of living payments were to females, and 58% were in families eligible for the means-tested cost of living payments are, again, female, but it slightly segues back to the point I made at the top, that females are disproportionately represented in the world of, in our customers, arguably. We also have, the cost of living payments were swift. It was £104 billion, and it was done to ensure that they could reach those most in need swiftly. Household Support Fund was slightly different in its targeting, and that was done to ensure that people in localities had a degree of control, because it is often argued, hence Scotland having it through the Barnett consequentials, that you know where your need is best. And so local authorities have distributed on our behalf. Now, 63% of that funding went to households with children, 11% of households with pensioners, and 10% to houses with a disabled person. Now, we obviously evaluate it's important that we understand it was a great deal of money in this financial year. It was 842 million in this country, within England, with the Barnett consequentials taking us to £1 billion. So I hope that covers.
I wonder, are you going to publish the detail of that? You may have said that, but I haven't picked that up.
James.
Yeah, so we've published estimated impact for policies that we've legislated for. So the estimated impact of the cost of living payments, for example.
That's not.
We then
really
publish management information as we go along. So on the Household Support Fund, we've published management information on where those payments are going and what they're being spent on. We'll then do an evaluation of the policy to assess the impact, which then requires sort of survey work and so on, and then it'll be a decision for ministers if and when that evaluation is then published. But the information that's out there at the moment is around where the money is going, what it's being spent on.
I would very gently say we have reached out to the devolved governments to ask them to return how those monies have been spent, and thus far we are still waiting for that detailed data. So anything you can do to help us receive that data so we can evaluate it effectively, would be brilliant, because obviously it's a bit chicken and egg until we have that clarity on the Household Support Fund of where it's been spent. It's actually very difficult for us to publish how it's been spent and how it's impacted.
And then the cost of living payments?
So as I say, the information is published on where those payments are, the characteristics of the claimants who are receiving those payments. So that's already in the public domain.
I'm still not 100% clear on whether it is your intention, because obviously there are some things that are entirely within your control. Is it your intention to publish evaluations on the impact of these payments, or at least some of these payments?
So
that'll be a decision for ministers to take at the appropriate time when that evaluation.
Minister, is it your intention then to publish the...
So dependent, as I say, as and when we have received the full evaluation, we will, across the piece, decide about what information is released. However, there is, as James has explained, already an awful lot of information that is in the public domain. So as and when we have that full data, I will evaluate, and then I will happily let you know if we are to publish.
Okay, I'd be interested in any reasons why you wouldn't publish. So moving on, but Minister, if I can stay with you, we have heard that...
My inclination would be to publish, because obviously it tells us that it is about how those low-income households and those with more acute vulnerabilities have been impacted. But as I say, at the moment we're still on the data collection end of it.
Okay. Thank you for that. We've heard that reversing policies such as the benefit cap and the 2-child limit could help to lift thousands of children out of poverty. Is that something that the UK government recognises? And if it is, why are you not acting?
So, on the 2-child policy, which came in 2017 and has been accepted by both major parties in government, 78% of families on universal credit have fewer than 3 children. Now, this is about fairness. Those families who are not customers, and some who have been or may be in the future and so on, we all have to make decisions about what is right for our individual circumstances. And the 2-child policy was brought in to help support those families go forward and to be fair to everyone. There are exceptions. There are exceptions for those who adopt a child from local authority care. There are, if you have a twin pregnancy, I can tell you from personal experience, you do not plan that. So if you get a bumper crop and that happens to be your second child, that is covered as well. And then those who have had children conceived through non-consensual conception, those children are also covered. So I believe the two-child policy is fair. On the benefit cap, the proportion of those households who are capped remains incredibly low at 1.3% of all working age households in receipt of universal credit. And again, this has to be fair for those who go out to work. It's why we have lifted both benefits but also the national living wage to make sure that it always pays to be in work. It's why we also have the universal credit taper to encourage the uptake of work, and the more hours you work, the fact that you are better off in that work. Have I missed anything?
No, I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to you a bit on that, Minister. You spoke about fairness. You said that this was about fairness, but do you think it's fair to those who are adversely affected by these policies that they are being treated differently to those who are being advantaged by them?
That isn't the way I would look at it. The way I would look at it is that that the cap continues to provide a balanced work incentive and fairness for those who are working and tax paying, because ultimately the benefit system has to be paid for whilst providing a safety net to support the most vulnerable. Getting people into work, lifting them onto a secure job where they can stay and actually progress is the dynamic direction of what we are aiming to do. And I would just gently point back to the fact that we know very clearly that children who live in workless households are 5 times more likely to end up in poverty. So it is a pivotal strand of how we approach this. I am not saying that it is easy, but that is why our job centres and the whole of our policies are focused on encouraging people into work, into having that support, whether it's young people with a youth employment coach, whether it's going on a sector-based work scheme, which is a really short scheme where you can learn about a different sector where you might think that you might like to work and so on. We support people through the additional job support. We support people through Restart. We have invested in the work well so that those with health conditions and so on can be supported on that journey into work. Because, we discussed disability earlier on, but there is something of the order of 2.5 million more women in work than there were in 2010, and there is also more disabled women in work than disabled men, actually, and that has been on a constant rise because it is the best way out of poverty.
Yes, I'm going to move on, Minister, but obviously none of these children are people that you're seeking to send to work, and it's the children who I was asking about and the children who are being adversely impacted. And I would also maybe point back to I could finish, the proportion of people who are in work, who are in receipt of benefits. So I think that some of these statements that are being made in a very binary way, I think should probably be something that we should be quite thoughtful about.
Sorry, I apologise. I'm hoping not to make them in a binary way. I'm hoping to emphasise the support, the wraparound support that we give people in order to lift them. And I would also point to the fact that it's this government that's brought in free school meals in order to make sure that children are supported. Nobody across the House wants to see children growing up in poverty. And that is why the whole tenet of helping families lift is one that, I would argue we would all support.
And to ease that financial pressure on families then, if that's what you want to see, I wonder if the UK Government will consider reducing the amount that it deducts from universal credit for debt repayment, given that the DWP will recover most of that debt in the long run.
So Deductions are something that I am acutely interested in and I am working on at the moment. Again, I would argue that we are sitting on the edge of a fiscal statement and we wait to see whether there might be any movement forward this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Minister. Chair.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you very much. Minister Caulfield, to what extent do you think the significant increases in cost of living actually become a health issue for women and children?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we know from physical, from our data on physical illness, such as heart disease, strokes, all the major conditions, even cancer, for example, there is a correlation between being in a lower socioeconomic group and having either both poorer outcomes but also higher mortality rates as well. So lung cancer, for example, is a classic example. It's why we're doing some targeted lung health check van rollouts in specific areas with lower socioeconomic groups, with people who've got a history of smoking but who traditionally have got poorer outcomes from lung cancer. And some of those rates of pickups by doing that targeted work for people who either maybe can't afford to get time off to go to see a GP or for other reasons have got those risk factors, was I think something like 70% of the lung cancers in those lung health checks are being picked up at stage 1 and 2, where traditionally it's stage 3 or 4, and that makes it harder to treat. So we do know that absolutely cost of living pressures do have an impact on physical health. We also know it's the case in mental health too. So we've just launched our suicide prevention strategy, and we're looking at high-risk groups. Women do feature in that, but tend to be in the younger age groups. So young women are struggling in particular, and then postnatal new mums are another group of women. And they don't tend to be, although I don't want to make generalisations, they don't tend to be so much around financial pressures. There are other issues going on there. It's actually men in the suicide groups where financial pressures are a bigger driver of the suicide rates. It's not as a kind of black and white as that by any means, but absolutely financial pressures do have an influence on mental health and particularly on suicide rates, but we tend to find that higher in men as a driver of suicide rather than in women. But there are particular issues for women which do drive those rates too.
So, with regard to the around, say, cost of living, I mean, where do you think that maybe poor diet in a woman's life at different life stages also has an effect on, on their health?
I mean, diet absolutely does have an effect, whether it's, and we're seeing a generation coming through now with dental health problems where poor diet has caused problems. We know, for example, by providing fluoride in some of the water does reduce dental cavities in children and then into adults later on in life very significantly. So diet is a huge factor, but also for things like cardiac disease, stroke, some cancers. We know that having a good balanced diet with your 5 a day fruit and veg, reducing obesity makes a huge difference. And in the data we're doing around maternal health and in neonatal health as well, one of the most significant factors emerging in terms of why our outcomes are so poor for pregnancy and outcomes is obesity. There's a significant rise in the number of women who are overweight during pregnancy, and that's why our focus in our family hubs, in our preconception work, is around getting not just women but everyone educated about the importance of good preconception health. And obesity is a major driver of that, and that's because of not having access to either the advice about what a good diet looks like or the availability to be able to cook a healthy meal.
I mean, on that basis, what practical things is the government doing? You talk about family hubs and actually advice, but there's a difference between advising someone they should have their 5 a day, but actually being able to afford it or being able to cook it and know how to cook it, and actually the health benefits. I mean, what kind of things is government looking at to try and actually look at the practical changes that could be made to actually help? Because, say, listening to an expert in a family hub might tick a box, but actually does it actually change how people are able to purchase good quality food and actually make good quality healthy meals?
Yeah, so it's about, I think we're doing two things really. We're targeting families right now, but also for children to ensure that they start off on a better footing. So the healthy food schemes that we have, I think there's £200 million devoted to that, and there's a number of elements. So one of that is delivering the free school meals in school, so that children do get a hot meal during the day. And I think that we've got about 2 million pupils who are eligible for free school meals. And that's, I think, there's over a third of all pupils are getting free school meals in our schools. So that's making sure that children are getting a healthy meal at some point during the day, and that's being extended into holiday activities, breakfast clubs, and so that there are a range of options, so that when school's not running, that the children are still getting access to those. And we're also got £30 million in our National School Breakfast Programme, which is funded until summer of this year. So it's really looking at how we get children into the habit of eating a good, healthy diet on a regular basis. There is also work that happens in job centres as well, when people are going forwards, because job centres, I think, I don't know, step on Minister Churchill's toes here, but it's not a great name for what job centres do. Yeah. They do a huge amount. So if someone is going in there and one of their pressures in terms of costs and why maybe they're struggling in work is around food provision, there is funding available to help them with all sorts of things, including help with food support. And so that it's a kind of a universal package. So funding for being able to get the cost of food is being done as well. But I think getting sure that children as a whole get into the habit of eating healthily on a regular basis is something to prepare them for the rest of life.
As we're a tag team, could I just mention the Healthy Start voucher? Perhaps
yes.
You'd like to go into that, because this would be something we would try and make sure that people are aware of.
What is that then?
So the Healthy Start voucher is enabling new mums to be able to get funding for food support, and that's why family hubs, particularly in those disadvantaged areas, is mainly health focused, but it is also pointing new mums in particular to those sorts of schemes that are available, and then the Healthy Start voucher is one of those.
Can I just ask, how do you get one?
So you can, when you're expecting, you will be informed about them. You get
by whom? GP, midwife. At what point?
A range of. Anyone can advise.
I've informed constituents about it. Because it's actually I met a young woman once, Daisy, who had received the vouchers, and it had changed how she approached. It's exactly to your point, how she had, because it is restricted to fresh fruit and vegetables, milk, pulses and so on. I'll hand back to, sorry, yeah. This is...
And some of the schemes that we're doing in schools as well is about funding to make sure that a child gets a piece of fruit or a day in school as well.
Sorry, can I just take you back? So the Healthy Start vouchers, right, so Minister Churchill can tell people about them in her surgeries, great, but anyone, how does anyone find out that they could recommend to a pregnant woman that they find that they...
Your health visitor would know that, and midwife
yeah.
and other professionals. As I say, it's been extended to include things like pulses and various other things to ensure that...
How many are given out annually?
It's in health.
Useful to see.
It would be useful to understand what the take-up was of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
sorry.
It can be done as part of social prescribing. There's there's not a restriction on who can direct people to the vouchers.
This is just for new mums, not for mums who have got children preschool.
No, I think it can be.
I'm
be helpful if we could
Yeah.
find that where, you know,
We
because
can send you the information on that, and then we can also send the figures. Gillian's from the Equalities team, but I can ask the health team to send you the figures about the uptake and in terms of and who's taking advantage of it.
I'm fairly sure it's £4.25 for a child under one, but you get double payments under one, and it also covers things like vitamins and supplements like that as well.
£4.25 a week, a month, a
well,
year,
A week.
Okay, for how long?
I don't think there's not a set time period. So if you meet the criteria, then you're able to use them indefinitely.
Until they're 18?
No. I think I'll check the age cut-off, but it's mainly for younger children.
Can I just add, it's children under 4
Yeah.
they're entitled, and children under 1 receive £8.50 a week.
Double. Thank you.
So, Minister Caulfield, just continuing on something quite different, period poverty.
Yes.
ActionAid have said that there's been an increase in period poverty from 12% 2022 to 21% in 23. I mean, what period products or assistance with period products do we have for women who are actually experiencing period poverty?
Yeah, so, this government has got a really good track record on this, to be honest. We've introduced significant measures. So, for example, the Department for Education has been providing free products in schools and colleges in England since 2020, and 97% of secondary schools and even 68% of primary schools have put in orders to DfE for those products to be available in their schools. I have met some young women and girls in education who often say that those are not freely accessible in schools, but that funding for those products and access to those products is available from DfE for schools. There may be a bit of work to do in making sure that schools take that option and use that scheme, but we have introduced that and something that we want to make it freely accessible so that you're not having to ask for a tampon or a pad, that it's freely available in bathrooms for young girls at school. The NHS is also offering free period products to every hospital patient, and that's why it's really important that when women are in hospital that they're in accommodation that is geared towards female health, and so that those products are freely available. And we've also changed the VAT rating on period products and included period underwear now more recently in period products, so that we've reducing the cost quite significantly. And before we did that, the fact that before we could zero rate period products, the VAT that was collected was then used and given to women's charities before we could zero rate it. So I think we have done significant work in that space in terms of making those products available in schools, in NHS facilities, but also trying to reduce the cost overall for all women.
So, I mean, do you think that the government should reinstate the period poverty task force? Because as you've said, many younger and older women probably don't know where to go to be able to access period products if they need them.
I think the task force came to a natural pause during COVID when a series of groups and meetings couldn't be held. And I think because there is a cross-government focus on this, and because these initiatives have been put in place, there hasn't felt to be a need to reintroduce the task force. But I'm interested, particularly for young women in schools, if those products aren't available, then we can certainly make a push. And I know DfE colleagues, particularly the Secretary of State, is keen to make sure that schools do make use of that scheme, because the government is funding that scheme to make those products available. So we would expect schools to draw down on that, to have those products available in bathrooms for young girls. We don't have plans to reintroduce the task force because we feel we're making good progress in this area.
Okay, and just lastly from me, in Scotland, women can go and get period products in their local area. But do you think that perhaps the UK government should be looking at something similar? So, for instance, you could go to your your local sexual health clinic or to your GP, and actually be able, if you are struggling, that there are places that you can go discreetly to get that assistance.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the family hubs that are being set up in most parts of the country now are particularly for those women who may be struggling, and I think they may well be available because they're an NHS facility. So when I say the NHS offers free period products, that not just for inpatient facilities, that's for outpatients, but also there would be family hubs that would be offering that. As we're setting up women's health hubs, and we're setting up those in every region of the country, that's certainly something I can ask to see, is that something that's being available, so that women who are going in for whatever, a smear test, contraception advice, whatever, can then discreetly access those products as well. So it's a good point, and something I'll ask for the Women's Health Hub team.
Confirm that and come back to us.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Kirsten.
Just wanted to very briefly interject and say that Leah is absolutely right that period products are freely available. You don't have to go to a sexual health hub or a doctor's surgery, although they are available in health centres. You know, in recent weeks I've been to schools, I've been to libraries, I've been to all manner of buildings that people go to every day, and they are freely and discreetly available. You don't have to go and announce your intentions. You go, you take what you need, and you go away and go about your business. And just think it's probably worth flagging that there is a way of doing that meets everybody's needs in a discreet and helpful manner.
It depends on, there's a balance as well to have costs. Whether you know.
It seems to be a well used and a well used way of doing it, and doesn't seem to be something that we hear of any challenges or difficulties with. Women need these products, women have access to these products, they use them, and that's the beginning and end of it.
Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Caulfield, can I ask you, as part of the government's package of childcare reforms, what options are available to a single mum during the school holidays who requires childcare?
So during, obviously we're rolling out the 30 hours free childcare. Applications are now open for parents of 2-year-olds to receive 15 hours, and that is something that's going to be extended more widely. But for mums who are on universal credit, for example, 85% of childcare costs are covered, and that does include holiday clubs, after-school clubs and breakfast clubs as well. So those on universal credit would have most of those costs paid for, even outside of school times.
So you're satisfied that there is sufficient provision for working mums who actually during term time are able to not have to worry about childcare because their children are at school? You're satisfied there's enough provision for them?
I mean, I think it's a balance. I mean, we know, talking to women, that childcare costs in particular are the single biggest pressure, and sometimes the single biggest deciding factor on whether they go back to work, if they go back to work, what hours they do, whether they do flexible working and then don't work outside of term time. So it is a big factor, and I think the government providing, we're expected to provide £4.1 billion by 2027, both in childcare costs but also early years costs as well. So we recognise that. I'm not saying that the what we're doing will remove all of those cost pressures for mums, but for those mums who are on the lowest incomes and who are on universal credit, the fact that 85% of their childcare costs, including out of school times, breakfast clubs, after school clubs, holiday clubs, would be covered, I think that's quite significant.
If I could just add to that, it's also possible if you secure employment and you need an advance, because it's actually quite challenging to pay for your childcare up front, we can help facilitate that advance so that people aren't actually running to catch up, if you see what I mean. So by talking to the work coach, it's one of those things. As Maria said, we have work coaches now. We're trialling them based in general practices for the health effect. We have work coaches who have a specialist understanding of the childcare offer. We are working I speak to the childcare minister quite regularly as to how we can improve the systems as well between the departments, because obviously as the offer expands, April it'll be the offer expanding for 2-year-olds, but come September it's down to 9 months. It's really important, we know, along with travel and healthcare, childcare is one of the biggest barriers to women for entering the workplace. So making sure we can support them and support them adequately so that they don't think, oh, I can't take this because I can't make the other 15% up or whatever, is really important. So we can help with these things as we go through.
I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, on the face of it, 85% of childcare costs being met for people on universal, a single mum on universal credit is great, but it's, when it comes to, if that individual is, as you say, you've still got to find that 15%, it is a big disincentive. And you can see a situation where women could make it pay while ever their kids are at school, and you've obviously thought about that and you've directed resource into early years provision, but that still leaves a real issue for a single parent who perhaps has 2, 3, even 4 children.
Yeah, so I mean, but one of the other things that is being introduced is the flexible working from day one as well. So for young mums, they may be able to, when they start a job now, be able to ask to maybe do the school run first, or start a little bit later, finish a little bit later. There are more flexible working options that women can ask for right from the start of taking on a job, which means that we won't cover the extra cost of that childcare, but it means that they may not have to require that childcare in the first place. There isn't a silver bullet to this. It's about making sure that we spend taxpayers' money wisely, but that's why we're targeting to those that will be able to least afford the childcare in the first place.
I'll come back to flexible working in a moment, but to be honest, it feels to me like we're being we're seeing a utopia that isn't there, and okay, government can make these things available to make life easier for working women. But actually, it's behaviours within, by employers, and also actually making women feel empowered that they can ask, because there's a serious issue here. But I just want to move on again, just to the issue of childcare, because we've got a growing issue with children with special educational needs. Quite significant, actually. I mean, I've been visiting my schools, and the demands being placed on them are quite peculiar, actually. I don't think we've got a proper understanding of what really is going on there. And we also know that obviously any children with disabilities will bring additional need in terms of childcare. But we're told by Gingerbread that only 18% of local authorities have sufficient care opportunities to be able to support any women in work. What's your view of that, Maria? What's happening to tackle that?
In terms of what type of care?
Childcare with children with disabilities.
Okay.
And education.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a growing area where we're seeing kind of emerging trends. I know, speaking to local authority colleagues, the sheer cost of both care costs overall, but particularly for children with special educational needs, is a significant pressure for local authorities, not just in the funding, although funding is significant, but in the lack of provision in terms of getting that special educational need provision. There's a lot of children where there's having to travel a long distance to get kind of placements and support. There's an issue with out-of-area placements. We are working with DFE colleagues to try and increase that provision because, for parents in particular, but for children, some children, if they're able to get that care in early, their outcomes are significantly better. And it's also about assessments as well. Again, with both autism and ADHD assessments, and this is something mums in particular really, really do struggle, and it's almost a battle through tribunals to get their children assessed. What we're doing is funding it is one thing, but it's getting the capacity of those assessments in place is the real challenge. So we are working with DFE colleagues on that, but also local government colleagues too. It's not as simple as funding it. It is about that capacity of the provision to be able to meet that demand.
But funding is an issue, isn't it? Because local authorities have borne the brunt of austerity for the last 14 years. And, I certainly know in my area, I think the whole issue of there's actually a perverse disincentive to local authorities to invest in provision for children with special educational needs and autism, because they then have that responsibility to them till the age of 25. So there's a real issue here, and as you say, that's fueling out-of-area placements. It's one thing portraying this generous offer, which it is, a generous offer to working parents, but we seem to be failing the most needy here. We need to be making sure that we've got sufficient support for those children who are most vulnerable. I mean, to be frank, if a parent's lucky enough to get a school place for their child with, a real need, that's great until school holidays. And there's, we're seeing here there's virtually no opportunity for them to access appropriate childcare, which we know for some of those children could be very distressing to be in the wrong kind of environment. And I'm sort of sitting here thinking, again, and the chair's sick of me hearing this, but my belief is that government should do most to support the most vulnerable. Yet every time the state does something, it benefits the pointy elbowed middle classes most. And this childcare package focused specifically more and more on the earlier years, with inadequate provision for children with disabilities and special educational needs, seems to be doing that. I mean, really, are we satisfied that we are doing enough to get those women, and we're talking about women, there is a gender pay gap, women tend to be paid less than men. Are we really doing enough to get women on lower pay into work? Minister Churchill.
So I think we're working exceptionally hard. So, for example, you talk about the provision in childcare. We have launched a range of workforce initiatives, do something big, work with small children. I'm working with, we've worked with the Department of Health on care plans to make sure not only can you enter into a career in care, but it also has progression and a pathway, and it is not always seen as the lowest common denominator. I would agree. I think we have all had examples as constituency MPs of that downward pressure. But making sure that we can actually build the sector, which is what the the actual childcare offer is £931 for a single child and £1,630 for 2 children or more. Actually driving that financial incentive helps parents, and I don't think we should diminish that. Is there other things we can do? How do we make sure that we have that suitable provision? With respect, that is probably best directed at a Department for Education Minister. But are we in DWP working with people? Yes, we are, because all parents can access the childcare offer. And there are those with limited capability for work who are missed out, and often this goes into families that are most vulnerable. But they can have conversations with their work coach and so on, and we can help them, because to a degree you're talking about a level of respite as well as support for parents. So I will certainly take away the challenge of are we doing it, and have a conversation with the Minister with responsibility. I believe we are doing a lot to help women be supported with childcare. I had 4 children under 5. Was a long time ago, back in the 90s, but in the 90s and the early noughties, I got no. I went to work. I paid for my childcare by going to work, and that was, in fact, it was topped up by the fact we had 2 incomes. But I believe that work is an enormous power for good. So I would say it's work in progress, but this is such an enormous leap forward.
But I think actually what you just said encapsulates really. You had no expectation of getting a henny hub from anyone else. The state has now made a promise it's going to give women that help, and my
parents.
I
know you segued on to lone parents, and I know we have 2.5 million lone single parents who are mums, but we also have, I think, 400,000 lone parents who are dads. You become a lone parent for a plethora of reasons, including bereavement. So making sure that I was talking to Minister Hollingray in the Department for Business yesterday, discussing flexible working, and how do people know they can access it? Making sure that we are better joined up.
I think they know
important.
They know it's a theoretical thing they can ask for. But I mean, the real point is, you had no expectation. We've now given society an expectation that the state will help them. I'm not satisfied that that there is genuine equity in that help, is what I'm saying. And that could be just as a result of where we are on this journey in delivery, to be frank, because it is being driven by cost pressures and by a desire to get more people into work. But I think as the policy moves on, I think we really do need to focus on making sure that we are genuinely supporting everybody, especially those who need it most. The issue of flexible working, we've heard evidence that there's a stigma, that women don't feel that they can ask for flexible work patterns. They fear it will impact their careers, and they worry that these requests will be denied. How do you think that the reforms will actually properly address those concerns? If I could start.
Yeah, so they will have a legal right to ask, and it's about informing women in particular, but everyone, that they have that. But I do think the culture is changing towards flexible working. I think COVID has single-handedly done that. Presenteeism was a massive factor for women in the gender pay gap, in not being promoted, physically being seen at work, whether you're doing any work at work or not, is a key indicator. That has ended with COVID and people working from home, doing remote working, flexible working. I think the stigma around that has gone significantly, and so that will, I think, help women both in terms of the gender pay gap, because this idea of just constantly being in the office, whether you're working or not, was significantly advantaged men. But this idea about requesting flexible working and employers knowing that it works, and actually, we see evidence that if people are able to work flexibly, they're often more productive, depending on your sector. And obviously, there's some sectors like in the health service where it's not possible. And the worry I have is for those low-paid jobs where, if you're a cleaner, you can't work remotely, but you can still ask for flexible working. And I think, this is why we've been slightly reluctant to completely walk away from 0 hours contracts, because while the abuse of 0 hour contracts needs to be removed, for often low-paid workers, 0 hour contracts are a godsend, because it means when they're available and work is available, they can take it. When they're not available, then they're not, that it doesn't go against them. So there are, making the workplace as flexible as possible. I think the stigma around that is changing on almost a daily basis.
So does it surprise you then that 30% of public sector workers who've requested flexible working have had their request denied?
Well, that's why we've changed the legislation, so it's a right from day one.
We'd expect the public sector, culturally, to be more open to this. So did you
I don't want to take us back, but your point previously around the importance of employers in this is absolutely critical, and that's one of the things that we're doing a lot of work around in the Equality Hub, is going out to employers and saying, look, we can have the best legislation, you can have the best HR policies, but it doesn't mean anything if your managers don't know how to deliver that. So we work closely with bodies like CIPD and CMI and help them to work out how they get managers into that cultural mind shift to recognise the benefit of giving proper consideration to flexible working requests and how to do that better. And there is still a long way to go in many organisations, but there are also some companies that are doing a fantastic job, and we're bringing them together. We've held a series of roundtables, some focused on childcare, some on supporting women with specific health conditions in the workplace, and just sharing expertise. And what we have been aiming to do is get some of the front runners into the room with the employers that would like to do more, so that they can learn, and we're creating that kind of momentum amongst employers, because it's absolutely critical. The causes of the gender pay gap, the by far the greatest cause is that workforce history, and because women tend to drop out of the workforce for a variety of reasons, caring, various health conditions, and then really struggle to get back in, we're focusing on those practical tools to get them back into the workforce. And there's a real appetite among employers because we have such high rates of employment at the moment. So they're being driven actually to employ, to make sure that they're keeping women in the workforce more, but often they don't know what to do. So we're trying to get that message out on what they can do.
You said companies, and my specific issue is the public sector. And when I was occupying Minister Caulfield's chair, I was horrified about how dreadful the NHS was as an employer, being brutally frank. And I get the impression actually that companies are more ahead of the game because they see the human capital of their employees. They measure their employees by productivity, whereas actually within the public sector, we manage things by inputs and process, and we define success by how much money we're spending. And actually within that becomes very dehumanising about how we treat our employees. I can see Minister Churchill smiling. What are we going to do about the public sector?
So, I think this legislation actually becomes live on the 6th of April. But it is to the point, every single person I engage with, I talk about job design. I think we have some of those entrenched views that jobs cannot be done any differently to the way in which they are being done currently. And I would say, that is a public sector and a private sector thing, and actually making sure that we are having conversations about job design, about how you can be more flexible. Why I was smiling was I was having a conversation with an employer the other day in my role. They had changed, and this was for cleaning work, and they had changed their hours completely to fit in when mums dropped off and when mums picked up. And that allowed, they said it has revolutionised how they are working, because they don't have a lot of people ringing up saying they can't make it, because that slightly traumatic time of the day when you're trying to get the kids sorted, etc., has been dealt with. You go to work, and they gave other incentives. The ability to make sure that people do it, and to your point in the public sector, that public sector leaders feel empowered to do it, is important for all of us, because it helps us give that bigger suite of employment opportunities to people, because it ends up being a barrier that shouldn't be there. And the whole point of what we're trying to do in getting people back to work is breaking down those barriers and making accessibility to work easier. And flexible working, the neonatal legislation that's coming in, all the things that with specific, bumps in the road in a female's life, we can help smooth that out and make sure that people can hold their place, as I think is everyone's right in the job market.
I'd also say it is about, as Gillian says, management training. I mean, when you talk to CMI, I think in the public sector, I think something like 80% of managers have never had any management training. They go in because they've been a senior doctor or senior nurse in the health service, for example, but have never received any formal management training. And managing staff in particular is an art form and a science if you want to build good teams. I mean, one of the things I did when I was a sister, and I had a small group of all women, actually, all female nurses. We were a research team, and our clinics were on a Wednesday and Friday. And so as long as our clinics were covered and staffed, I did not mind if the team wanted to, we went to a long day model, a 12-hour shift, because actually that worked for the team better, because they could then work 3 days and have more time off, because the clinics always overran, so they were staying till 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening anyway, so they might as well stay and do those as their formal hours. And actually we had a lot less staff sickness, we had a lot more staff retention. When they were there, got their childcare covered because they weren't having to do it for the whole week. They could do it for specifically the clinic days, and it worked really well. But you do need to empower people in senior roles to have that management training, and I think that's something that the NHS is now rolling out. There's now management programs for all senior staff, and even the departments of civil service are doing the same. We've just for too long taken it for granted that if you're experienced in your role, you will naturally be a good people person and manager of your team.
Forces Society has called for employers to advertise flexible working by default. Is that something you support? And perhaps I could encourage you, bearing in mind we've had 30% of requests for flexible working in the public sector rejected, whether we should be particularly encouraging government departments and state institutions to lead by example.
One of the things we are doing is a pay transparency pilot, because that also disadvantages women when pay bands are not advertised, and they have to kind of go in to negotiate what they think might be on offer, whereas men tend to be much better on that. And I think at the Treasury Select Committee, we did, I think I did give a commitment to look at whether we could do flexible working transparency as well as part of that. That's something that because it's the Equalities Hub that's running the pilot.
And on the flexible working point in the public sector, certainly in the civil service, all jobs are stated, unless there's a very good reason for why it can't be flexible. But I don't know the exact percentage, but the vast majority of jobs are advertised as being flexible and often part-time as well. And there is a real business benefit to advertising flexibility. We've done trials with the Behavioural Insights team with both the MOD and with the Bank Zurich, where all hiring managers were required to say whether the job could be done flexibly or not, and they had to make a business case if it couldn't be. And they put what types of flexible working were open. So could this be done part-time? Could this be done compressed hours? And put that in the job advert. And in all cases, that increased the proportion of applicants to the job that were female, but also the number of people who applied to those jobs, because it sets a really clear message, and it's that cultural point again around we are an employer that will think about you as a person. And the next step on that we're looking at here is with the pay salary, the pilots with the pay in the job advert as well. But it all fits into this transparency around job adverts and making that statement at the beginning that this is the kind of employer that I am, which is more attractive and attracts more employees. But it starts to make employers think about how they frame a job and how they deal with their employees right from the very start as well, which helps to move that culture on as well.
Okay, that's fine. Final question, Minister Churchill. We've heard that the quality of support that work coaches can offer is patchy and inconsistent. How are you going to ensure that women, regardless of age and where their background, are really getting the tailored support they need to get into work?
So driving down on making sure that we have a consistent offer right across DWP is hugely important. I meet with my leadership team on a weekly basis. I have stats reported to me weekly as well. One of the challenges we have is big and small job centres, where it's easier to have perhaps more on offer, making sure that we have that full gamut. But I would argue that our work coaches, who are being built up in numbers and who are being consistently trained in what is on offer, are doing a phenomenal job, and making sure my job is arguably to drive that consistency in with those in leadership across DWP, because making sure that whether you come into a job centre as a young person, where we have a youth hub offer in some places, we have a work employment coach in our branches, in all of our job centres we have those that specialise in 50 plus, assisting people because the needs may be different. So somebody 50 plus, I'll often speak to, I've connected with job centre staff from 5 job centres in the last 8 days. I think that says how interested I am in what our frontline offer is, and making sure that it is tailored to women and to men who cross our threshold to give them the very best chance of getting into employment, because arguably that's what it's about, making sure that, if people need digital skills, they can access training, but they can also access equipment. I happen to be visiting SmartWorks tomorrow, which is a fantastic charity that helps women prepare for interview by helping them with their outfits and so on. You've got the linkages, as we've discussed earlier, into refugees. You've got a good network across the piece. There are 651 job centres. Some of those that were stood up during COVID are being pulled back into the estate. The consistency is a really important point, and something that, as I say, I look at the data weekly to make sure, because the true impact is making sure we get people into jobs.
Your data, how granular is it? And the reason I ask the question is, if I was a work coach, there are people who will cross my threshold who are easier to help than others. How do you make sure they're not just delivering for the quick wins?
So, I have meetings with work coaches that are randomly picked from across the country every couple of weeks, so they can tell me how it feels to them, whether that's I've spoken to people in the north of Scotland, I've spoken to people at Cardiff, Cornwall, East Anglia, North East, Kent and London. I asked for I'm laughing because my private secretary is behind me. Every week I ask for more and more granular data. I want to make sure that where we are derogating, because work coaches are working more intensely, that doesn't mean we aren't delivering the core service that runs through the body of job centres, because it's really important. We have all this there to help. We have people who specialise in people, and that's why we want that resource, whether it's as they get lifted into additional job centre support, whether they go on the restart scheme, whether they're recommended to go towards the swaps. I was talking to somebody in the nuclear industry about a boot camp that's going on in the southwest to help people enter the nuclear industry. 77% of those who currently don't work have the skills to enter that industry. Making sure our support is consistent is probably top of my priority list.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Gillian, can I just take you back to your comments? I think you said about helping people return to work. Does the Cabinet Office still have a returnship programme?
We do, yes.
And how's that going?
Sorry, are you referring to the Cabinet Office as an employer or the pilot that we're running?
As an employer, used to have 7 or 8 years ago, I can remember the Cabinet Office boasting about its returnship programme and having a full 4 returners.
That particular programme I don't think is continuing, but I don't have the figures to hand around the Cabinet Office. I'm very happy to go back and speak.
Did you? I mean, I think it'd be really interesting, because you've been really advocating getting particularly women back into work, advocating flexible working. I just wondered whether the GEO, which is, of course, based in the Cabinet Office, was actually practising what it preaches.
I will check with the Cabinet Office Returners programme. Yes, I think that's the best thing that I can do.
And the Minister for the Cabinet Office, is he too championing flexible working?
That is certainly as an employee of the Cabinet Office, I can absolutely say that it does. The culture is certainly there, and it feels that it is a flexible employer. And the Minister for the Cabinet Office, the last time I heard him speak at an all-staff event, was very much encouraging people to work flexibly as well. So, yes,
And not to be at their desks rather than their pelotons.
I couldn't comment on the peloton.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. A question for you, Minister Churchill, because all the discussions about flexible working and the legislation change all sounds fantastic. However, we know that more women than men will ask for flexible working because they are the ones who take on all of a lot of the caring roles within their family and their networks. But the elephant in the room for me is pensions, because in my experience, I worked in the education sector for the same amount of time as my husband, and I earned quite a bit more. But because I took time off to have a baby and have family caring duties, my pension is less than his pension. So is the department looking at that? Because that's really, really important, because my worry is, with all of the talk about flexibility, in 20, 30 years' time, we're going to discover that women are even poorer when they get to pension age because they've got less pension in the pot.
I agree with you that there's a pension disparity, and I'll hand over to James in a minute, but we have done the new state pension reforms to try and minimise that, and more than 3 million people from 2030 will have a higher state pension than they would have done.
What about legislation for private pensions and for public sector pensions? Because in the whole reality of things, the pot with regard to state pension will be significantly lower to those that employers have actually contributed to.
I apologise, but pensions are not my brief in the broader sense, but arguably I think one of the challenges and one of the benefits for the additional childcare support and so on, and when you return to work when your baby is 9 months old, you are talking of smaller amounts of time away from the workplace, and obviously your contributions carry on, or your state contributions carry on whilst you're on maternity pay and so on. But the challenge is we have the babies. I think the difficulty for me is we also have a lot of women in the workplace who choose not to have a family, trying to be fair.
But I think it would just be interesting, that whole dynamic, be interesting to see if there is any research done, for instance, male couples compared to heterosexual couples, to see whether there's a disparity in actually when people get to pension age, whether men are better off in pensionable age than women, because quite often flexibility, a lot of women don't necessarily want flexibility. It's just that life dictates that they need to have that flexibility.
Indeed, and I think the statistics around female pensions are that we end up almost a third lower than men, and you would expect, I certainly know that my friends who are in same-sex couples, they have had two consistent incomes as they approach retirement. But arguably that's also about some of the choices we make. I'm going to hand to James.
I mean, I think all I would add is that this is something that we think about really seriously whenever we're looking at policies around state pensions and private pensions. And I think, one example of that, for example, is whenever there's changes to the rules around national insurance contributions, DWP is always really involved in those discussions and the impact potentially on people's pensions. So there's a lot for us to take away and think about there, but I would just say that it does definitely form a central part of our thinking about pension policy.
Because obviously, if women don't have babies, then we don't have anybody in the future to be able to pay the pensions out.
And also, as we're talking about the impact of women on pension age, it rather goes back to some of the discussions that we were having in the earlier point, that 63% of customers that we have of pensionable age are women. Chair, with your indulgence,
I'm not sure there's going to be much indulgence, because we've got two sections of questions to get through in the next 15 minutes.
It was about the cost of living impact on the disabled and the intersection. Obviously, I just
come back to that at the end if we have time. Belle.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Caulfield, perpetrators of domestic abuse are using cost of living pressures as a tool to intensify control over their current or former partners. What work are you doing with the Safeguarding Minister to prioritise victims, survivors' safety during the cost of living crisis?
So one of the things that we have introduced, I think I touched on this at the beginning as well, is that COVID had a significant impact on domestic abuse and women's ability to leave their situation, and the cost of living pressures then were pretty swift after the restrictions were lifted. So the flexible fund trial that was done in May this year with the Women's Federation for England, enabling women to have direct cash payments, we feel has made a significant difference in the women's ability to be able to leave that situation, and mindful of the cost of living pressures, whether it's around getting a deposit for a flat, or whether it's being able to afford on your own bills that you were previously able to cover in a relationship. We've there's £230 million that's going into a lot of this work, and we're extending the flexible fund until March of 2025. But in addition to that, we recognise that economic abuse is a legal form of domestic abuse, and working with creditors to have a bit more flexibility when it comes to the pressures women are facing who are fleeing domestic abuse, whether that's debt with credit cards, whether that's other utilities debts. So they recognise that the financial pressures that really do sometimes either deter women from leaving a violent situation, or enable women to struggle when they have left and then return, because there's a high return rate to situations as well. We recognise that financial pressures are a key reason for that, and that's why we've specifically introduced this funding, so that women get that cash themselves.
Thank you. And Minister Churchill, how many hours of training do frontline members of DWP staff in the Job Centre Plus and Child Maintenance Service receive in recognising and responding to domestic abuse? And what does that training involve, and who's actually expected to complete it?
So work coaches are expected to complete it. It can last up to 13 weeks, and if a work coach has a particular interest, at their discretion, they can ask for additional training. So, if they are a particular link and so on. Everybody has 90 minutes of mandatory training in how to support vulnerable claimants and those with complex needs, including the victims of domestic violence. The domestic abuse content covers recognising those signs and supporting appropriately. Also, it's about being linked up to others, because economic abuse, because as you stated in your question, coercive behaviour often, and particularly in times of hardship, happens in and around controlling the financial payment. The Home Office is controlling or coercive behaviour guide, and the role of economic abuse. The guidance is also fed down as well.
And what measures are there in place to support survivors with additional needs, like disabled people or women for whom English isn't their first language?
So, again, the work coach works with individuals and can always suspend the requirement for them to be looking for work whilst receiving benefit if there are acute periods of pressure for that individual, particularly in and around challenges like domestic abuse. It may often take some time for that individual to find themselves in safer circumstances, and therefore to suspend the need for them to look for work is quite important in order that they can rebalance.
And I think also just to point out that the more wider, and domestic abuse falls into this, the more wider work on violence against women and girls, there is a cross-government group of ministers that meets regularly. The Home Office chair it, so that we all feed into the work that we're doing, whether it's the NHS, for example, for looking after our staff. There's a high percentage, because it's a highly female group of workers that suffer domestic abuse themselves, so we need to be mindful of looking after our staff. but more widely they will come into contact with women experiencing domestic abuse, and it's about, you know, supporting them to be able to recognise those women and to signpost them to help and support. But every government department is represented at that Violence Against Women and Girls cross-government board, and that's where the domestic abuse plan is, you know, true. You know, whether it's DFE in educating young women about the kind of signs to look out for, whether it's DWP in financially supporting women, whether it's in health, because we know that we class it as a health issue. You know, all government departments are focused on how we better support women who want to leave those violent situations.
In that case, what's your department's approach to equality impact assessments overall? I'm thinking about things like the budget today and potential cuts to public services overall, and the fact that you're talking about government departments working together. How do you approach a situation when the decisions made by different departments clearly impact women in a negative way? Is it flagged in a certain way? I mean, it doesn't comply with Equalities law if it's impacting women in this way. So I just want to understand how your department
approaches that. Is there an example that you can think of?
Well, I think about generally, you were talking about people that work in the NHS perhaps not getting the pay that they need, and how that may impact things like domestic abuse, as you said, in terms of how much money they receive and how much they working with their partners, etc., to fund their home. You're saying that as it stands, when you have an equality impact assessment, you don't necessarily look at things like that. You don't flag it with the government if the decision they make on how much people are being paid is quite directly going to affect how much money they receive in their pocket, and therefore them overall and their household.
I mean, I think, you know, we obviously do cross-government right rounds when decisions are being made, and we input it into those. But things like the flexible fund, for example, that's a significant investment, and we've extended that to March 25 with a further £2 million investment. You know, we cross-government are supportive of that, because it will make a difference for women having that money to be able to flee situations. We've got HMRC, for example, who are doing training with their staff, so that if women are contacting them in financial difficulty, that they absolutely know the importance of supporting a woman who's experiencing domestic abuse. So there is cross-government work on this. I'm not sure that there is a policy that I've seen where we feel that it will negatively impact women fleeing domestic abuse. All our effort is to try and help women, particularly by firstly recognising that economic abuse is domestic abuse. I think that was not being recognised previously by any other government. There's reports that 1 in 10 women have debts specifically put in their name by men, so that then struggle to flee because they've got a poor credit rating, they can't get loans, they can't get a deposit or a reference for a flat on their own. It's specifically done so that women cannot flee, and the fact that we're recognising that and trying to put measures in place both financially but also a better joined up approach across government, I think, you know, that's something that we are proud of.
Minister Churchill, what progress is the Child Maintenance Service making in preventing abuses from exercising coercion and control over former partners, such as through abusive payment reference fields or non-payment or erratic payments?
So where a parent reports to the Child Maintenance Service that payments haven't been made on time or in full, Child Maintenance Service will take action to re-establish that compliance, or if the case is on direct pay, then what happens is that child maintenance will move the case to collect and pay, and then take steps to recover the arrears for the individual. Following a recommendation in Dr. Callaghan's independent review, we have reviewed the Child Maintenance Service domestic abuse training to ensure that it remains in line with best practice at the CMS service as well. Is there anything else that perhaps I should have mentioned, James?
No, I think that's exactly it, Minister. We've been looking at our processes to make sure that they work correctly in those circumstances.
Because again, it can be used as that coercive control, can't it, or that remaining link to causing pain.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maria, can I just take you back to your comments about the NHS high proportion of women in the workforce, and specifically what role do equality, diversity and inclusion plans have in the NHS to tackling domestic abuse amongst your staff?
I mean, they do have a role. There's no doubt about that, because we're training managers across the board around identifying domestic abuse in the workforce. But we're also in every ICB. We now have a sexual abuse lead for every ICB who's responsible, whether that's for looking after patients, but particularly looking after staff, because we've had not just domestic abuse, but we've had reports of sexual abuse within the workforce itself. And so there is, in the last 12 months, there's significant work being done so that every part of, and I can only speak for England because it's a devolved matter, every part of England, that we are all kind of singing from the same hymn sheet, that the training for staff is the same, that the reporting mechanisms are the same, the follow-up mechanisms of those reports are the same, because we have seen instances in the past where people are aware of maybe a staff member being a victim of domestic abuse, but not a lot is done with that information. So it's about training for those leads that then filters down into every department that is in their area, so that women don't, firstly, that the signs are recognised, so whether that's coercive control, whether that's domestic abuse, economic abuse, whatever the kind of risk factors that could indicate that someone is suffering are picked up at an early stage, so a woman doesn't have to necessarily kind of report to their line manager. But then when domestic abuse is identified, how do we support our employees? Is it with a flexible working? Is it with time off? Is it with other measures? So that one, we're just not learning about more domestic abuse happening, but we're supporting then those women to.
And where does responsibility sit to make sure that happens?
So that's why we've appointed a specific named ICB leads, so who will be accountable to NHS England and will be then responsible for devolving that work at a local level. So that's why we've got named leads. So every ICB has a named person now that will be taking that, both for domestic abuse but sexual violence for patients and staff as well.
And would the remit sit with an inclusion manager? Not
necessarily. So it's up to the ICB who they identify as their lead, but it can be a senior manager, it can be one of the HR directors. We haven't defined who that person is. It's up to them to identify them, but they will be named so that they know that accountability sits with them.
Thank you. And I'm conscious we've got 3 minutes left, so this is going to be very quick. Why is the NHS struggling to meet its target on breast cancer screening?
So we have got, just to correct the record, the breast screening programme is working well for routine breast screening for women over 50, which is every 3 years. We have had a specific issue that's come to our attention in the last month for high-risk women who had radiotherapy to their chest for other cancers, so mainly non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There was guidance issued a number of years ago, I think back in 2003, that they should be having annual MRIs because they were at higher risk of breast cancer. In some cases that happened, in some cases it didn't. The NHS has identified those women that weren't having annual MRIs, and they're now being recalled if they haven't already been in the system.
So last week, Breast Cancer Now were in Parliament with the statistics around routine 3-year screening, which actually showed that we're not meeting the targets. I can't remember the specific number in my region, but I think we were only at about 53% instead of 70%. That's not very good. What's being done to make sure there is a targeted approach to the women who are least likely to take up screening?
Yeah, so there is an issue in terms of breast screening uptake. So the invitations are going out as planned, and GPs send their lists to the breast screening teams when they're visiting those specific areas. It's once every 3 years. But the uptake has fallen, so it's not because women aren't being invited, it's because they're not attending. And we have seen COVID has had an impact because the breast screening vans, which are once every 3 years, got out of sync. Women got out of the habit of attending for their their regular mammograms. And so we are doing a particular push in those areas where uptake is the lowest, and whether we do, we're not planning at the stage to make a shorter interval. So if you've missed those 3 years, it could be then 6 years before you've had your mammogram, because the next time the van is in your area or the screening program is in your area, it's then, if you don't attend that, that's 6 years you've not had a mammogram. So we want to make sure that those areas where uptake is the lowest are particularly targeted, but it is getting that message out and get women back into the habit of going for their 3 yearly mammograms.
You're sending out, was it lung cancer vans?
Yeah.
Are you doing additional breast cancer vans or not?
We're not at the moment because the screening program is based on being in an area once every 3 years, and so if you're between that age over 50 to 70 or over 70, if you're requested to stay on the program, you will be called. We're not planning a catch-up program on that as yet, but it is really important that we get that message out that if you're called for your breast mammogram, that you do come forward and have it done.
What are you doing to get the message out?
So we are doing a lot of work, particularly with primary care, getting that message that if it's in your area, it will only be once every 3 years, so that if you miss that time, you won't get recalled again till the next time it's in your area. So it's really at a primary care level that we're getting that message out, that if you get your invitation, you should attend.
So you've said it sort of 3 times, you're getting the message out. How? Is this just via contact from your local surgery? Is this letter, text, email, advertising campaign? If we're
so the national screening program is also doing some comms on this to get the wider message out about the importance of breast screening. But it's not just breast screening. We're seeing rates falling in routine vaccination and immunisation as well. So I think since COVID, people have got out of the habit of going for regular health tests, checks, and whether that's breast screening, but it's also the case for other screening programs and vaccination and immunisation programs. It's why we've got the problem with measles, because the immunisation rate has fallen, particularly in the West Midlands and London, and that's why we're seeing an uptick in measles. So overall, there's a kind of public health message with directors of public health at local government points who are trying to get those messages out about all sorts of health programs where the invites are going out, but the participation levels are dropping.
Thank you. I think there are a couple of issues that we wanted to follow up with in writing, but obviously budget day, so everybody wants to whiz off and find a nice seat in the chamber. Can I thank all of the witnesses for their contributions this morning? Please do write to us if there's anything you feel that we've missed. Order.
Proceeding has ended. The 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 proceeding has ended.